Okay, Ashwani, I have 10 questions for you. Thoughts that arose from me while reading the book and considering meditative inquiry. In the book we're discussing, a wide variety of authors shared their own perspectives on the role of meditative inquiry in their own lives. In this interview, although my questions have been inspired by the book, they more directly relate to meditative inquiry itself, the role meditative inquiry plays in your life, and how it might relate to the lives of readers of the book. Okay.
Sounds good. Thank you, Bonnie, for doing this conversation.
Thank you. Yes, for answering my questions. And I will begin with perhaps a very obvious one. I realize you have written numerous articles and entire books exploring this concept. But my first question is this: what is meditative inquiry?
Well, in this new collection, I have tried to provide a little bit of explanation right in the beginning, free of jargon, free of too much academic constructions. I tried to convey in as simple a words as possible, and actually I included like 10 poetic kind of statements to give the essence of what meditative inquiry is, in my view, to the readers. So a few things before I explain what meditative inquiry is, there are a few things that I would like to explain. One is that meditative inquiry is not something that I have necessarily developed or coined. As you will see in the beginning of the book, I have used Song of Creation from Rig Veda as the epigraph to the entire collection, just to it's a beautiful piece of poetry, and it's full of spirituality and inquiry, and it's very old. But the reason I chose that for to illustrate to the readers that meditative inquiry, or the desire to understand ourselves, the desire to understand our relationships, the desire to understand the world, it's has existed since time immemorial. It has always existed. Human beings have always been curious about what the life is all about and what is our place in it. That is the larger context. The way I describe meditative inquiry, based on my studies of numerous educators and philosophers, but particularly through my own explorations and inquiry, because in meditative inquiry, it is not sufficient, as I've also said in the book, to read others and quote others. So it's not just an intellectual and cognitive exercise. It's an exercise in which, or it's a process, it's a endeavor in which your whole being is involved. The center of meditative inquiry is to live a life of awareness, and I can talk a lot about it. We can engage in a long discussion about it, but basically it's to be aware of yourself, how you think, how you feel, how you act. In our social institutions, in our educational institutions, very little emphasis is laid on understanding ourselves. Now there is a lot of emphasis on identity. There is also a lot of cultural identity, sexual identity. But a meditative inquiry is calling something deeper in ourselves, to be aware of our very process of thinking and the way it has been conditioned, the way it has been constructed, the way we are programmed to look at the world in certain ways. So it's a very deeper exploration of oneself in relationship to other people and the environment. So in a nutshell, I would say meditative inquiry is an exploration of oneself in relation to the other people and the whole world. And the key process that is invoked in meditative inquiry is a sense of existential awareness. So I think I'll leave it at that, because I think it may come up again, and I can explore, because I can keep talking, as you know, on this topic.
Yes. Okay, marvelous. Okay. And now, having delved briefly into the idea of meditative inquiry, now to consider the book. You're the editor of this book rather than the author. What was the inspiration for creating this collection? Did it change as it was created, shaped by the contributions of the authors, or is this how you envisaged it from the beginning?
Well, I would say in its intent and its vision, it stayed more or less the same. But of course, when you are engaging with so many authors, and the authors are engaging with themselves, so we adopted a collegial peer review process where authors were engaging with each other on their writings, and then I was also engaging with each author independently. So of course, because of those exchanges, the thing that began, it did not remain static. Like meditative inquiry, it was not a static process. It was a dialogical meditative inquiry that evolved itself into the book. So from the very beginning, the idea that was proposed by me was that it's a dialogical meditative inquiry. The authors were engaging with my work in relation to their own perspectives, and I was engaging with their work from my perspective. So it was a dialogical process, and therefore it has elements of spontaneity and emergence and all that. But the vision, as I said, it stayed consistently more or less the same. And the vision was, since so I published, I have, as I very briefly described in the book, I've always been interested in meditative inquiry, in meditation, in self-exploration, in understanding the problems of the world at a deeper existential and spiritual level. So it has been for a long time part of me. You could say from my teenage years, when I came across the work of Indian poet Kabir. He's very prominently known in India and around the world, very radical poet and philosopher, I would say. So the elements of meditative inquiry have continued in my life since then. Very briefly speaking, when I came to the doctoral program, through hiccups, through challenges and difficulties, it emerged that the focus that I wanted to do in my doctoral research was this idea of meditative inquiry, which I briefly discussed as a response to your first question. So after I wrote my thesis, the last part of my thesis says, and then which it became a book, that my hope is that the complicated conversation continues. That's the phrase by Bill Piner. It's a very famous phrase in curriculum theory. So my hope was the conversation would continue. And when I came at the Mount, I taught a variety of courses, and I used in many courses part of my thesis. In some courses, students read the whole thesis. And through that, I developed a quite close relationship with a lot of students. And also, because the book is published, a lot of people also wrote me from different parts of the world, sharing their thoughts on the work and what they think about it, how it has inspired them and influenced them. And then in 2018, I wrote a conversational paper with Adrian Downey that was given an outstanding publication award from Canadian Association for Curriculum Studies. And at that time, it occurred to me that it's been a while since I have been engaging with this work. I've been offering workshops, I've been writing about it, I've been engaging with students and colleagues about it. It might be good to see if there are folks who would like to engage with it in relation to their own work. So not as an independent commentary on what I am doing, but a dialogical engagement with the idea of meditative inquiry from their own perspective, which they have many of them had already been doing. So that was the inspiration to further enhance the conversation on meditative inquiry. And the conference that we are organizing on this book is a step further to continue the dialogue and the conversation.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that was a very detailed answer. I appreciate that. And now you've mentioned that throughout your life, really, for a very many number of years, you've been using meditative inquiry in your life, and it has informed it. And now, of course, you're a professor working at a university. So historically, professors and academics have been quite notorious for living in ivory towers and have been traditionally encouraged to focus on promoting themselves in what may be seen as very egocentric ways, although this may well be changing in the modern academy. Do you find it difficult to balance the constant demands for publication, teaching, presenting, and the encouragement, you might say, of the individual ego that comes with striving for these goals that are a part of your job as a professor, with the impulses of meditative inquiry, such as connection, community, letting go of these attachments?
Well, I think that's a wonderful question, Bonnie. I have explored this question in part in my dialogue with Adrian Downey in the Teaching as Meditative Inquiry paper. And recently, I co-authored a paper with a few students where we are exploring exactly these questions: how academia in North America is quite controlled by capitalist culture. So what you're describing are reflections of the capitalist and Eurocentric culture, the emphasis on me, the emphasis on self, the emphasis on your own progress, shamelessly promoting yourself, and even when the work may appear to be done for social justice and social welfare, in essentially because the system wants you to be self-centered and ego-centered, even those works may be rooted in capitalist and Eurocentric thinking, which promote emphasis on self and self-centered activities. So definitely, because I work in the academia, I am not free of those pressures, and I am not free of those burden that come upon you and force you to kind of produce for the sake of producing. Because when you do that, you end up producing very low quality work, or it is mostly externally driven. It is not that you're passionate about something that you want to write. It's because if you don't write, if you don't get grants, you are not going to make it to the tenure. You are not going to be tenured, and later on be promoted to full professor. So what you are describing is very important. However, the way I have dealt with it and throughout my life, that I have given emphasis in my life to what I am passionate about. And so that has, of course, has its drawbacks and its positives, but the positives would have been the positive that have been proven very significant for me is that that regardless of the outcomes, I have tried to pursue what I really want to pursue. And that's what I did in my doctoral dissertation. I was going to do something else, and then I realized, no, this is not really, this is not where my passion is. This is not where my heart is. And a number of people like Bill Pienaar and Fallon and Karen Meyer, these three come to my mind. They really encouraged me to, they saw where I'm coming from, and they gave me the little push that I required to take this step. Indirectly, though, they were not directly doing anything, but I sensed being valued in their eyes for what my thinking is, what I was trying to bring to the table. And so I ended up to pursue my passion, and I continued to do that throughout. Of course, I've done some writings here and there, which were for the sake of writing or I had already done. So it's better to get published. But mostly I have pursued my passion. And as you know now, when I became interested in music, I went wholesale into learning about it. understanding it. Now I'm trying to teach it, and through teaching, I'm learning more. And now my research primarily centers on Indian classical music. So the way I have, not that it has not impacted, there was a time when in my career that I was not feeling well, I was feeling isolated, I was experiencing some physical issues, I was experiencing some issues in the workplace. So those affected me quite seriously, but I took the time for myself and re-heal and re-strengthen myself through this living process of meditative inquiry. You know, when I say meditative inquiry, it's not a structure or a standard practice that I can give it to anybody. It evolves from you. So your meditative inquiry is going to emerge from you, rather than me telling you this is what it is, Bonnie, go and do it for the rest of your life. So it emerged as a response to the experiences, the internal and the external experiences that I was having. That meditative inquiry begin to transform the life, including my serious interest in music. It emerged during that time. So because I took time off, I did not publish for a little while, but it prepared me, it strengthened me quite a bit. And after that, when I came out of that phase, I became quite prolific, but not because of primarily any external pressure. I had regained the desire to share my thoughts with other people.
Right,
So I invited a bunch of people to have conversations with me, and published very unique and different kind of academic works, which if a B.Ed student reads it, they don't have difficulty, they love it. If the graduate student reads it, PhD student read it, if a professor reads it, it's written in such a way that it speaks to all levels, but at the same time, it's free of jargon. So it's a direct communication with the audience. Did I answer your question?
You absolutely did. Yes, thoroughly. Thank you. I appreciate your answers.
Thank you.
Recently, you know, I'm a PhD student myself, and in the research that I'm currently doing, I've rediscovered that many students see the main purpose of higher education as being career related. You know, they are involved in this very process that you're describing. And many of them believe that the success of a degree or a course should be judged on whether it will contribute to them getting a job, rather than whether they learn from it. How does using the lens of meditative inquiry shape this narrative? Like, what do you think that it might have to contribute to a student perspective?
I would say that meditative inquiry helps me to challenge this perspective. And this perspective is also rooted in the capitalist culture, right? So because everybody has to pay for their education, so the education is being seen as an instrumental activity. You do this in order to get that. And we have a lot of discussion. I have a lot of discussion with my students on this topic in the class, that because we have instrumentalized education, we have reduced it to nothing. Because education, in its true sense, should be the development of your whole being. And learning about what job you want to do, or that it contributes to a career that you want to pursue, the vocation that you want to pursue, it's perfectly fine. But what has happened is, now it is only a means to a particular end that you already have in mind. So as you see, in North America, students have to pay so much for their education. So when you are paying so much money for their education, your university is a service provider, and the universities try to portray themselves like that. And your professors are also your service provider. You are a client to them. So when you are buying a course, because you buy course by course, right? You're buying a course, buying a degree, you go into the class, you are sitting there as a customer. You have what your expectations are, what you want from the professors. And when you don't get that, you definitely get very upset. And in my view, what can save academia, or what can save higher education, from this capitalistic and neoliberal bombardment is the professors who really care about the education, who really can engage with the student to see that, we all are a victim of this capitalist system. So when you are acting like a client and you want me to act like a service producer, together we are dehumanizing each other, and together we are bringing this whole society to a very low standard of thinking, of living and being. This is what meditative inquiry does in the classroom. I acknowledge their considerations and concerns, but rather than catering to those considerations and concerns, I engage with them in understanding the larger social structures, cultural structures, and how they are impacting them and me. And this investigation, exploration is part of meditative inquiry. Often people, as soon as people hear meditative inquiry, they think meditative inquiry is you sit in a corner and you breathe in a different way. But to understand how the culture shapes you, how the society shapes you, how its systems shape you, and turn you into a particular entity who is responding to those systemic and cultural and structural demands, is part of meditative inquiry. It helps you go very deeper into yourself in understanding the deeper reasons and structures for your thinking and feeling and action. So this is how meditative inquiry contribute.
I see. And now you mentioned there that some of your students are B.Ed students. So you're teaching students who are learning to go out into the school system, the typical school here in Nova Scotia, say, and teach, work with students, with young people. How do you have discussions on how they might then bring this into their classroom, or is it more about them themselves as a student that you focus on in your sessions with those B.Ed students?
So I teach at BED, I teach at BED level, so B.Ed students, prospective teachers. I also teach Masters of Education students. Many of them are already teachers. And I also teach doctoral students. And I try to permeate meditative inquiry throughout everything that I'm doing in all of my courses. To your question, so meditative, when you are, there are many layers to it. When you are inquiring within yourself and your relationship to the society, you are developing a deeper understanding of yourself and the social structures and the social relationships. When you have that kind of a deeper exploration, it obviously permeates all aspects of your life, including the classroom that you are teaching in, right? So throughout the discussion, when we are engaging with any aspect, of course, because they are teachers, so the students' behavior, students' expectations, students' difficulties, students' engagement, all of that is part of the discussion. So again, it's not only an exploration of yourself, but your exploration of yourself in relation to teaching, in relation to your students, in relation to your family. So their classrooms, directly or indirectly, are central to the meditative inquiry process in the classroom. And I have been teaching a lot of courses, but primarily holistic education, foundations of curriculum studies, and in all those courses I have been engaging with students in bringing meditative inquiry to their teaching, to their selves, and it definitely goes to their classroom. And over the past 10 years, so many students have engaged with me in the classroom, and then later on I've organized a lot of symposia, lot of interactive sessions with my students to the larger public at the Mount and outside of the Mount. And recently, just one more thing before I say one more point. In this book, there are chapters by students who were in my classes and then who experiment with meditative inquiry and other holistic approaches in their classrooms. And very recently, I created a whole course on meditative inquiry. And that course went so wonderfully. And it was a Saturday course. So they would come to the class on Saturday. We would engage the whole day. And throughout the week, they had time not only to reflect on themselves, what we were doing in the class, but actually to try certain things out in the classrooms.
Right.
But not as instrumental techniques and methods, something that they understood, something that spoke to them, something that they found transformative for themselves. They were so curious and keen to experiment with that in the class. So in the conference, you will see there are 5 teachers who are coming and speaking in a panel. Some of them, all of them have been in my course at one point or the other, but one of them was actually a student in the meditative inquiry course, and then again in the holistic education course. And he has been talking to me via email and bringing to the class the work that the students are doing. That's very heartening. So it definitely, but it's not just intellectual or academic discussion that we are having that remains confined to the text and the classroom. It goes beyond my classroom. It goes to their lives, both outside and inside of their classrooms.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and so we've been talking now really well about the book, how it links about meditative inquiry. I'm going to take a slightly different stance now rather than asking a question directly about it. And it's because the idea of critical thinking and critical pedagogy is another idea that came up throughout this book, mentioned by a number of people. There's a book by Stephen Brookfield called The Power of Critical Theory. And in it, he describes how critical thinking and critical pedagogy can cause what he names as radical pessimism by bringing to light the depressing realities of the world without necessarily providing solutions. So in this book we're discussing now, your edited collection, it was written during the pandemic, a world crisis that focused attention on uncertainty and fear. How does meditative inquiry differ from and relate to critical thinking? And what role can meditative inquiry play in addressing pessimism, uncertainty, and fear?
Well, there are common elements. So in my book, as a curriculum as meditative inquiry, I've talked about the difference between the difference and similarities between critical pedagogy and I would just say critical project of various kinds and meditative inquiry. So the critical project or the critical pedagogy traditions basically questions the problems in social structures, in social relations, particularly highlighting the problem of inequality and oppression. So the response of a critical pedagogy tradition is to understand these inequalities, these oppressive structures, and bring about a transformation in the society, in the social structures, right? So up to this point, there is no difference between meditative inquiry and critical pedagogy. The difference starts with understanding the nature of structures themselves. So it seems to me that for critical pedagogy, structures are outside of human beings. They're independent of human beings. And if we change the structures, the human beings will change. So I inverted the whole idea by saying that the structures are crystallized forms of human consciousness. They have emerged from human beings. Now, of course, there is a reciprocal relationship. Structure shapes human beings shape the structures. But if you really want to know what is the origin of structures, how the structures have come into, human beings must have had some intentions, some desires, some hopes, some wishes that brought out these structures, right? So if there are problems in those structures, as Krishnamurti says, they are a representation or they are a manifestation of problem within human beings. which he calls the crisis of consciousness within human beings. So if we really want to change the structures, there has to be a radical change within human beings. We really need to change very deeply. So there is a little departure from, you can see, from critical pedagogy to meditative inquiry. The emphasis is more on the self. Not that you don't pay attention to the structures, that you don't critique the inequalities, you don't question the oppressive structures, you do all that. But you see that that all is sustained by a mass of human consciousness. Mechanical, conditioned, self-centered consciousness. And unless we introduce a sense of deep awareness, deep awakening within these internal structures, the external structures are very hard to change. And I've tried to explain that by a number of examples. If you create anti-racism policies, anti-racist laws, it only does to very little extent. It only changes things superficially. It doesn't change people deep down. The only deeper change can come when somebody is willing to look within and see how that person, what that person thinks about, and how those thoughts have entered me, who has shaped me, who's controlling me. And that requires a deeper inquiry, a deeper meditative inquiry. So this is, to me, is the difference between the two. How I think meditative inquiry is very hopeful in my view, because it is not only dependent on changing the structures or changing or bringing about a revolution in the external structures. It is bringing about a change in your microcosm, within yourself, in your relationship, in your classroom. So it is such a microcosmic space that there is a lot of hope and possibilities if one is interested in it. And I have seen over the past 10 years I have been teaching, I've seen that hope, that sense of possibility in the students. Often they also ask the question, how are we going to change the structures? How are we going to change the bigger structures? But then the more we engage, the more they begin to see that by changing yourself, you are changing the structures. You are part of the structures. By engaging with your students in a very subtle, non-threatening, non-destructive way, you are bringing about changes in your microcosmic sphere. And that is connected to the macrocosmic sphere, right? These things are not separate from each other. The Krishnamurti says, right, you are the world. And a lot of people keep asking, okay, what does he mean? What does he mean? This is what basically it means. You are connected to everything that is happening in the world. And if there is a change within yourself, that change is going to ripple through, whether you want it or not. Whoever you will engage with, whoever you will interact with, that change is continue to act, but it's a more organic, subtle, a more implicit kind of a process rather than changing a policy. Not that changing policy is not important, but changing policy doesn't change heart. Often it only forces people to behave in certain way, to become hypocritical, to develop incongruence between what they actually think and feel and what they are doing.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to continue to explore this kind of idea relating to two ideas from within the book. So there are two impulses that could be potentially seen as being not in opposition, but in contrast to one another, that come to light in various chapters of the book that I find very interesting. And I'm going to use two examples of them here to give you an opportunity to elucidate. So, this is the difference between striving and exploration. So you mentioned Adrian Downey earlier. In his description of his chapter, he writes, Kumar's writing asserts that striving toward a goal will only result in more internal conflict, and that striving in itself is not to be desired. While Christine Fleming, in a later chapter, writes, writing as inquiry is akin to meditative inquiry in that both are exploratory in nature and support self-discovery. So these aren't contradictory statements, but they seem to imply different impulses. So could you share your insight on these two different observations, that striving in itself is not necessarily to be desired, while exploration and self-discovery absolutely is?
Well, it's first of all, I think it's Adrian's and Christina's own interpretation, right?
Of course, of course.
So
yes, I understand.
I cannot speak to why they are interpreting in certain ways, but I can share my own insights in relation to the question that you are posing.
Yes.
So I think exploration is very important in life. If we are not interested in exploring ourselves, what inspires us, what interests us, then I think life is very meaningless and dull. It has no creative quality to it. But if you look around, life is an explosion of creativity, of beauty, right? And human beings have this intrinsic desire to learn, to understand, to explore. Like often people say, find out techniques and methods and strategies to help children learn so that they learn, but they don't understand what you are doing is you already know what you want them to learn, and then you want to trick them in as many ways as possible so that they can learn that, right? But that doesn't mean that the students don't have the desire to learn, or children don't have the desires to learn, or human beings don't have the desire to learn. We all have tremendous capacity to learn and desire to learn. We all want to learn. The learning becomes burdensome when it is somebody else's objectives and outcomes that you have to meet. Then it brings frustration, anger, unhappiness, instrumentalization of education and all that, right? So exploration, I think, is intrinsic to life and to human beings, and it should be encouraged. Genuine exploration, the authentic exploration, organic exploration should be encouraged in schools, in society, and emphasized a lot. Striving, on the other hand, is a very different thing. So exploration is something that you naturally are drawn to something. You want to explore it, you want to understand it, right? Striving is when a goal has been put into your head, or you have been made to believe that certain things are important, and like hedonic cycle, right? You once you are on it, you can never get out of it, because whatever you will get, it's going to appear less if it is coming from the striving perspective, right? No matter how many raises you get, there is always something else to get. No many how many things you accomplish, there is something else always to be accomplished, right? So striving is something that gives you stress, that is externally driven, that you are doing to get external approvals or external appreciation, while exploration to me is intrinsically driven. The life is propelling you to do something. Like that's how I felt with music, that it was as if the whole life wanted me to do that, so I continued to do that, right? But I can also turn it into a striving now, right? It's very easy. Ego can take over, that I need to become popular, I need to get this person's approval, I need to get that person's approval, I need to perform here, I need to perform there. So the exploration, the capacity to exploration, the desire to exploration is very natural. It exists in all of us, but the society corrupts us, and that exploration can turn into striving. So, but I am not saying that you should suppress your striving, because by suppressing it, you're not going to understand it. So if you see that you're striving, then you see what comes with it. Competition comes with it, stress comes with it, jealousy comes with it, comparison comes with it, a sense of not being well comes with it, right? So when you study that, through that study, the striving component of exploration can be questioned and be freed of. But if we suppress striving, then it becomes corrupt and it becomes perverted. So, and you know, this is not new. Buddha, for thousands of thousands, and in Upanishads, that the desire is the source of all problems, right? It's not new. But I don't think the desire to learn, desire to understand, desire to inquire, I don't think that's problematic, but it is corrupted by social structures and our own egocentric tendencies.
Yes, yes, it's interesting differentiation.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm creating it on the spot, Bonnie.
Yeah, I know.
Uh,
But the fact is, I agree with you. It's just interesting to explore. I like
Oh,
hearing
I
you.
think the reason I said that, that's the joy. If you
Yes.
if you post something, then there is something for us to consider, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
So on the
And
spot, I have to think of something, how it fits together.
Yes, it's true. And to continue this point, because I mentioned Adrian Downey, he also states that as far as he knows, you never directly assert what the self is.
What the
Just
self
because
is.
I'm curious, just because I like hearing people talk about their ideas on this. Ashwani, what is the self?
Well, I think I have talked about it very briefly, but the way I look at self is not like a permanent conceptual identity. You know, in lot of in philosophy, they try to pin it down, and in different religions, like in Indian religion, they have the concept of higher self or supreme self and all that. So I look at self very simply. So within yourself, when you close your eyes or you just pay attention, so much is going on. Constant movement of thought, constant movement of feelings, identification with those feelings, suppression of those feelings, conflict with those feelings, thoughts that you want, thoughts that you don't want, thoughts that you want to pursue, thoughts that you want to get rid of. All this assemblage, all this constant movement within ourselves that we experience, to me, that is self, right?
Yeah, right.
But then the capacity to pay attention to it, that capacity can be said as self, but it's independent of it. It's the awareness that we are talking about, right? The quality and the capacity to pay attention to what we to the experience, to the subjective experience that we have inside of us. So the subjective experience and its movement is self, and the ability to pay attention to it, that quality of awareness that can be aware of this movement, is can be considered awareness. That's how I would like to differentiate. So self to me is very simply whatever you experience within yourself on a daily basis. The changing minds, changing moods, changing behavior, changing notion of who I am, what my contradictions are, conflicts are, happy, what my joys are, all that experiential dimension that is moving within ourselves day in and day out is, to me, self. So it's very existential view of self. It's not a philosophical or a spiritual view of self. It's the way it is.
Okay. And so and there's just two questions I'd like to ask about action, and it's because to me this is this very interesting sort of continuity between awareness and action, you know, this impulse that drives us. So as you mentioned previously, meditative inquiry encourages us to look within if we wish to address the problems without. Prayer and meditation as approaches to addressing crisis are frequently seen as being cop-outs. You know, you see when people say thoughts and prayers, that kind of thing. they're replacing action with lofty philosophical thought.
Mhm.
What are your comments on this narrative or perspective? And what would you say that meditative inquiry as an approach contributes to this?
Mhm. Well, there is an element of truth in it. So first, I want to acknowledge that, because you see, the people, those who become interested in self-exploration, are generally spiritually minded. And often, if you see the traditions in India and even the traditions in the Western world, they escape the society,
Mm.
right? Like very serious of them become monks,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
They want their own salvation, right?
Mhm.
So I think, to me, that is actually navel gazing
Mm.
and escaping from your responsibilities, because questioning the problems in the society, questioning the oppressions in the society, questioning the inequalities in the society is very central to living a full life, living a meaningful life. If you see in the book, in this book, I describe 7 principles of meditative inquiry, right? And the first one is questioning everything without fear. The second one is critiquing the social injustices. So when I'm only the goal of my personal inquiry, spiritual inquiry, is my own salvation, independent of the world that I'm living in and its corruptions and the problems and the difficulties. To me, that is kind of a cop out. That is kind of a escape from the problems of the world. So that's why uh, meditative inquiry is not a way to escape the difficulties of the world.
Mm.
It is to understand where those the oppressions, where those inequalities, where those um, uh, struggles and wars and difficulties are emerging from. It is very part and parcel of that. So it's not that you are freeing yourself and creating a distance from the world. It's you're freeing yourself, because freeing yourself is the process of freeing the society, freeing the people who are around you, and not as a noble act that now I am free and I'm going to salvage people. In the very action of my inquiry, I'm helping everybody else to inquire deeper, and vice versa. So if there are people, like I have had dialogues with some of my close friends in India, and a friend in Canada, those conversations, those dialogues have deeply helped me understand myself. If you read the dialogues that Krishnamurti have with a number of people, those dialogues, when you partake in those dialogue, you're not just listening and intellectually analyzing, but when you are situated in the dialogue, when you are partaking in the dialogue, those dialogues are very helpful in your own liberation, in your own understanding. So if meditation, prayer, whatever you want to call it, whatever name you want to give, an existential inquiry, an urge to understand oneself, to understand the meaning of life, the depth of life, if it takes you away from, or it takes you look down upon the social structures and problems, or takes you away from that, to me, it is a cop out. It should give you the capacity and the intelligence to deal with the problems, not run away from them.
Right. Okay. Okay. And then this last question I have, it relates very much to what we're saying now. In your work, you acknowledge that the world is in crisis on many levels due to human action. Within the approach of meditative inquiry, you suggest that the answer to these crises lie within each of us as we change. We help others to change. Admittedly, however, this is a very slow process. And by that, I mean to start within myself to solve the problems of humanity. This is a very slow process. So considering the modern world, especially the online world, which encourages impatience, a desire and expectation for immediate solutions, a belief that simplified slogans can encapsulate complex problems, and the active sowing of division and extremism. What advice do you have for people, especially for young people, regarding the use of meditative inquiry in their own lives and managing these types of expectations?
Mhm. Well, I think you put it very aptly, Bonnie, that something appears slow to us because we are impatient. Also, that we have certain expectations and we want certain solutions. So I don't think meditative inquiry is giving you a standard solution. If you do this, this will happen. It's an inquiry. It's not a meditative solution, right? It's an inquiry. It's a process of understanding yourself. And if you are interested in it, I don't think time matters. Time only matters when you already know what your goal is. So I have to become enlightened, or I have to achieve nirvana. Time is running out, right? Every day, every year, the time is running out and I am not reaching my goal. So the impatience or the idea that you are not, that's where the striving is, right? That you are not enough, that you are not doing enough, that you are not doing it in a right manner. It comes from because you have the standard already set. And that is the root for impatience and measuring your understanding and inquiry in terms of time. So I think that should be let go. Neither it is slow nor it is fast. It is inquiry. The slow and fast, the imposition of time is rooted in our desires and our impatience and what we want from it. So we want to sit quietly for 10 minutes and we want to be free of our stresses and fears, right? It is rooted in our own conditioning, in our own expectations. So that's one part of it. It's neither slow nor fast. It is a process. It's an ongoing process, and it's inviting people to engage with themselves and the world in a more awakened, in a more curious and creative manner. That's one part of it. And this is what exactly I would like to say to the youth, that society has, and the educational institutions has robbed you of your capacity to be yourself by imposing their educational expectations on you, by imposing their expectations of success on you, by imposing their expectations of what is the right way of living, right? Having bigger car, having a bigger house, they have imposed all that on you. So your task is a Herculean task. Your task is a task to discover yourself, to understand yourself. And no social media technology is going to help you. No book is going to help you. No organizations and institutions are going to help you. What can actually help you is your own interest in understanding yourself. And if you have that real interest in you, if you have that real inquiry in you, then you will find the right people. You'll find the right books. You will find the right organizations. You will find the right friends. But it begins with you. The charity begins at home. It cannot begin with somebody else. It has to begin with you. So it's a challenge that youth needs to accept, that it is their responsibility to discover themselves. Social and educational institutions are not interested in it. They have never been interested in it.
Those are all of my questions that I have. And I think that we've had a pretty thorough discussion. I really appreciated this, actually.
Thank you. Well, I hope, Bonnie, you asked questions that meant something to you, right? And I know that you did, because that's where the conversation or the exploration becomes genuine when we feel that when a question is being posed, it is not a question just for the game of it, that somebody is really interested in understanding.